Moving on to agenda item 9, discussion and instructions and possible adoption of an ordinance to amend Chapter 11 of the Rockville City Code entitled Human Rights so as to add a new section 11-3 entitled Fostering Community Trust. Ms. Kimball?
Thank you, Mayor Newton. The Mayor and Council initially discussed this topic back on February 27th. Staff had presented some background information at that time. As well, there was a draft ordinance attached to your February 27th materials, and the Mayor and Council discussed that, and Councilmember Polakowicz-Carr introduced it at the end of your discussion. That draft ordinance is attached as item A to tonight's materials. Following the February 27th meeting, you had a public hearing on the role of the Rockville City Police Department in the enforcement of federal immigration laws, and that was on March 6th. For this evening, we've provided some of the background information again, as well as the public record and some research that we had conducted on what other communities are doing in the area of community trust. I won't go over the background information again to save you some time this evening, but it's included there in your materials. In terms of the research, we found that elected bodies have established policies, ordinances, resolutions, and guidelines on this topic. Of the 19 communities that we examined, 9 have adopted ordinances and 7 adopted resolutions. 2 others adopted some combination of those two, and then 1 community has adopted guidelines. Action on this topic actually goes back as far as 1985, and that was Tacoma Park. But 14 of the 19 examples that we have showed that action was taken since January of this calendar year, 2017. Many of the ordinances prohibit employees, local government employees, from first inquiring about the citizenship or immigration status of individuals. Second, from discriminating against an individual on the basis of their citizenship or immigration status. And third, releasing information regarding the citizenship or immigration status of an individual unless required by state or federal law. Typically, officials and employees may not detain individuals or condition services based on immigration status. These sample guidelines, ordinances, and resolutions that we examined often indicated that the local government shall not use its resources to assist with federal enforcement of immigration laws. However, the police will enforce criminal laws. Again, this is just a sample of ordinances and documents that we were able to find, but it gives you a little bit of a flavor of what activities other elected bodies have taken over the past 6 months and further back. You had also asked us about federal grants associated with the Immigration and Nationality Act. According to the National League of Cities, the Department of Justice has indicated that potential withholding of funds for noncompliance with the Act only pertains to 3 federal grants. One of those the city has never applied for or obtained grants from. 2 others we have. We've received Justice Assistance Grant funding for purchase of bulletproof vests and fingerprinting equipment. And approximately $7,400 of those awarded federal funds have not been spent as of now. We've received another $2 million in COPS technology and equipment grants, and the city has spent all of those funds that were awarded by the federal government. And we have applied on a number of occasions for COPS hiring grants, but we have not been awarded any of those funds. I would just also note that the city currently complies with federal immigration law and would continue to be in compliance if the Mayor and Council were to adopt the Fostering Community Trust Ordinance. We're here to answer any questions if you'd like, but I will pass it back to the Mayor and Council for discussion.
Great, thank you so much. Councilmember Feinberg.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wanted to read a statement. I know many of you have come here tonight and want to know how each of us feels about it. Immigration has become a polarizing issue in America. Many recent immigrants recount stories of oppression in their home countries and their quest to seek freedom and opportunity in the United States. This is a familiar theme in America. From Plymouth Rock to Ellis Island, Almost all of us are the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, or have other ancestors who arrived in this country in search of a better life. Many newer immigrants, principally those from Central America, have faced hostility and discrimination when they arrived here. This, too, is a regrettably familiar theme in America. They have been called illegal aliens, murderers, and rapists by Donald Trump during his presidential campaign and the early months of his administration. Acts of violence anywhere in this country are often incorrectly ascribed to immigrants. We are incredibly fortunate to live in a city, county, and state that have been welcoming to immigrants. Rockville residents, city staff, and all the elected officials sitting here on this dais strongly embrace the values of inclusion, diversity, and appreciation for people from all countries and cultures. The city should be saluted for services provided by government and the nonprofit community to residents, irrespective of immigration status. And yet we know that there are immigrant families, having seen, read, and heard about ICE roundups and deportations, who have profoundly legitimate fears about what is going on in a variety of cities and states throughout the country. Thankfully, this sort of situation has not happened in Rockville. The ordinance that we are being asked to consider focuses exclusively on the role of our police force with the immigrant community. The essential question is, do we need to revise the way in which the city police interact with residents, whether here legally or not? All members of this council have met with police officers to gather information and engage in productive conversation about Rockville City Police Department practices and solicit their thoughts about a proposed ordinance or law. Councilmember Paschella summarized a meeting with Councilmember Onley and the Rockville City Police Department on May 1st of this year. In his email to his colleagues, he noted the following. 1, when there is a need to ask an individual about a potential infraction or illegal activity, police officers do not ask for immigration status. 2, police officers can use a subscriber service called the Language Line in order to communicate with individuals who have a primary language other than English. 3, in situations in which an individual is identified as the driver of a car that has exceeded the speed limit, the officer requests a driver's license. He or she runs the license and license plate against the National Crime Information Center, or NCIC. This is done for any driver. Officers would not and do not try to determine immigration status. Even if the NCIC database indicates that ICE is seeking the person, the officers would not act on it. The officers stated that as a local police force, they do not have the authority to enforce federal law, which has been repeated many times this evening. 4, a person can be arrested for severe violations such as drunk driving, egregious speeding, and domestic violence, but an arrest is never based on immigration status. If an arrest and charges are warranted, the person is transferred to the County Central Processing Unit. The County Department of Correction and Rehabilitation takes custody of all arrested people. Note, no police department takes custody at this point. Any contact with ICE is handled by the county's Department of Correction and Rehabilitation, not by the police departments. 5, the city police may call on ICE to assist them in a variety of situations. They gave an example of an individual who was involved in armed robbery at the Twin Brook Metro Station and was suspected of living in this country illegally, as well as an individual who was a chronic offender. The officers said that they would like to have the option of seeking backup by ICE if they requested such assistance. 6, the officers said that their actions are governed by a, quote, unwritten rule, unquote, in the city. So I ask the question, where is the problem with the Rockville City Police Department practices with regard to the role of the police force with the immigrant community? Let me say it again. Police in Rockville interact with all residents of the city without regard to immigration status. With exceptions for serious crimes, there are no cases in which the Rockville police have conducted immigration raids. There are no plans to change the current practice. There are jurisdictions in this country that could benefit from adoption of the ordinance that has been proposed. Those jurisdictions need such an ordinance because they do not demonstrate respect for all residents and are all too eager to work with ICE or other agencies that seek to demonize immigrants. Many would agree that the City of Rockville and Montgomery County are progressive in their policies, practices, and programs. Many of you have stated that you're proud to live either in the city or the county. Note that such an ordinance did not pass in the state or in Montgomery County. This ordinance simply is not needed in Rockville. An ordinance will not diminish or eradicate real fear of ICE agents knocking on the door of an immigrant's home, the very real fear of seeing ICE agents outside a place of worship, the real terror of seeing ICE agents standing in the public right-of-way outside a food bank or a health clinic. An ordinance will not stop ICE agents entering the city of Rockville or Montgomery County. What we do need is a policy that will address the unwritten rules that have been followed. The creation of such a policy should be an endeavor of the city's police department, who are our professional public safety officers, and the city manager and his other staff. An ordinance is a law. It has no flexibility for contending with complex situations that may occur in the future. Laws shouldn't be drafted for political agendas or symbolism. It requires specific steps for enactment or amendment, which inhibits our officers from making extraordinarily time-sensitive decisions while exercising their time-honored judgments. A policy allows us to be responsive to events, to act in a nimble manner. Therefore, I propose that we direct the Rockville City Police Department to craft a written policy regarding police interaction with immigrants. And as such, I move that the mayor and council direct the city manager and the Rockville City Police Department to develop a written policy outlining the procedures that local law enforcement officers will follow with regard to the immigration status of individuals during the course of their work. Such policies will be developed within 30 days and must be approved by the mayor and council. Thank you for your attention.
Could you repeat your motion, please?
Yeah, I would be glad to, and I do have a copy of it for some of my colleagues over there. I move that the mayor and council... sorry. Beg your pardon. I move that the mayor and council direct the city manager and the Rockville City Police Department to develop a written policy outlining the procedures that local law enforcement officers will follow with regard to the immigration status of individuals during the course of their work. Such policies will be developed within 30 days and must be approved by the mayor and council.
Did everybody get that? Good. Okay, all right. Is there a second? Councilmember Onley.
I'm going to second it because when a motion is not seconded, you can't discuss the motion. It just dies for lack of a second. And I know what it feels like to sit up here and make motions that are not second and people don't weigh in. And so I always second a motion if nobody seconds it. And I do second that motion.
Thank you, Councilmember Onley.
All right, motion's been made and seconded. Discussion. Councilmember Pershela.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I am the one up here who suggested that we all meet with the police. And Virginia Onley and I, Councilmember Onley and I, did meet together with the police, and I memorialized that meeting in an email to my colleagues. I sent that email to the police, and one officer, basically at my request, reviewed it and didn't change anything I wrote, but added some clarification, some perspective, and that sort of thing. That's not in our packet, but it's a public document. If anybody wants to see it, they can see it. To answer a few things by Councilmember Feinberg, or let me first clarify something. Why did I, in the first place, suggest that we meet with the police to get their perspective and their practice? And the reason is because that what the police are doing is an unwritten policy, so nobody knew exactly what that was. So that means a few things. First of all, it can be very fuzzy. It can be interpreted one way by one police officer, another way by a different police officer. Nobody out there in the community knows what the policy is because it's unwritten. But secondly, what I confirmed is that nothing that is being proposed in this ordinance is in conflict with current police practice. Policy making, especially on important topics such as this, is the purview of mayor and council. It is perfectly within our right, and I would say within our responsibility, to lift it up to this level when it needs to be lifted up. Councilmember Feinberg could have made this suggestion weeks ago, but this is the first we've heard of it. Another reason to have this policy publicly debated and reviewed, multiple perspectives, and let me show you something. That's what we had to read, all that stuff. And I read it. Most of it as it came in. So we've had a lot of input on this. We need clarity for everyone. We need clarity for the police. We need clarity for all employees of the city. We need clarity for all residents, not just citizens. And that's what this provides. So I will vote against the motion made by Councilmember Feinberg. I think it's could have been proposed a long, long time ago. Just dropped it on us, when it's time to make the vote. I think it's, at this point, not a wise thing to do. We've already had the hearings. We've already discussed with the police. We've already had multiple and many hours to think about this, and so I'll vote against it.
Councilmember Feinberg.
Thank you very much, Mayor Newton. One of the reasons, unfortunately, that the motion had to be done now is we never really had a robust discussion on whether this could be either an ordinance or law or resolution or a policy. It was in our brief books. It did describe the 3 different types, but there was never a discussion here because, in fact, the ordinance was never shared with any of us ahead of time. It was just simply shared at the evening of the meeting with no forethought or working with a team with your colleagues. So actually, this is just my way of trying to force the conversation of another option, which would be a policy. If all along through the last several months there had been this mutual give and take and sharing of ideas, that may not have been the case. But unfortunately, that's not what happened with this one. The issue in regard to the conversation with the Rockville City Police Department, and I think I have taken exactly from the email that was summarized, so I don't think I'm mischaracterizing anything in what was shared. If you speak to the police, what's also not been shown here, ask them what they say. How do they make those split-second decisions? What happens Do they have to think about what is the law? What happens if there's an emergency? To make a change to a law requires certain steps and processes. It would have to be noticed. It would have to be introduced. There would have to be an amendment. That takes a long time. When we have emergencies, we've seen how things occur with almost warp speed. If you have a policy, you don't have that same kind of time constraint. You could have something written to in a policy that in terms of an emergency, it could be overruled by the city manager in times of a city-wide declared emergency. You can't do anything like that if you pass an ordinance. It is that ordinance and that ordinance alone. Another issue is what happens. We have the Montgomery County Police here right on our borders. They provide assistance to us on many occasions. Do they have to think about what is the law in the city of Rockville? Or am I going to go by the practices of Montgomery County? There are jurisdictional issues if you pass something here that is different than the county. And note, the county did not pass any kind of ordinance. They have policies and procedures which generally the City of Rockville Police Department is following. There is not an ordinance in the county that was passed. It was suggested, and they decided not to. So you have another jurisdiction that has said no, that is surrounding us.
I'll just say that's the same as what happened in Gaithersburg. Councilmember Plakovich-Carr.
So in the several months since this ordinance came before us, or actually at that first initial meeting, staff did prepare information about what is the difference between an ordinance, a resolution, or a policy. And as I recall, the main weakness of a policy is that they're not officially documented anywhere. Ordinances are part of the official city record. People can go on the city's website and actually see those. There's, I guess, an official logbook for resolutions as well. But that's not the case with policies. It's just less transparent. Second, with the Rockville Police Department, they are governed by the laws of the city, but in addition have dozens and dozens of field orders that basically are the translation of city, state, federal law, and what that actually means in terms of how officers are going to handle particular situations. I can easily envision that if this ordinance passes tonight, that the police department will need to come up with a general directive or field order for some particular circumstances that are not specifically addressed in the ordinance. The police do have the ability to make some specific decisions there that are not addressed in the draft before us tonight. To the point about the amount of time that it would take. First of all, the point of, and why I brought this forward as an ordinance is, I do want this to have the strongest possible protection. This really is meant to set the tone and the direction for our city. It was mentioned that there be requirements for hearings or for noticing. That's not the case with legislation. So I really, I will not support this motion. In the 4 months or so since public debate started on this, the only changes that have been proposed were the ones that Councilmember Prashela brought forward that we'll be looking at here shortly, that were up at the dais for everyone this evening. But that's the only input I've received from this body.
Councilmember Feinberg.
Sure, policies certainly can be put on our website. There is nothing prohibiting that, so it could be a record that's on our website. In fact, it could be on the home page of our city's website. It can be with links about public safety on our website. So there can be a way to very easily and transparently find this particular policy. So it would be very easy, not only for our residents and people who are in the city, but for our police officers and other public safety officers in other jurisdictions. So in terms of transparency, it certainly can be transparent. It can also be promulgated in Rockville reports. There are numerous ways it can be found. We could be keeping it here in City Hall. So as to transparency, it certainly can be done. But you just can't predict everything that will occur by field orders and saying that. And if in fact there is an ordinance, if you're going to start drafting field orders, you might as well draft a policy. A policy gives you guidance on how to act in different situations, but it is much more nimble than a law. A law does not give you the ability to make changes rapidly when you need to. And if you ask many of the police and many judicial officials, they will say that's the problem with passing a law in this regard. It's not that anybody who is against the ordinance is against immigrants, is against diversity, or believes that this will cause any additional crime. That is clearly not the issue. And unfortunately, in this polarized environment that we are in since January 20th, people have just been taking an issue and have been fear-mongering on both sides. Both sides have been fear-mongering. When I see a Facebook posting that says, this is an ICE roundup, could this happen here? And then you find out where was the picture? It was in Texas. Montgomery County is not Texas, thankfully. We are a much more progressive state and county and city, and we all champion that here. So we need to keep that perspective also.
Councilmember Prashela.
Madam Mayor, I'd just like to remind everyone in this room and those who watch, we have many laws in this city and in this county and in this state and in this country. They all go through the same process, no matter which jurisdiction. Councilmember Palakovich Carr brought this up as an ordinance. The nice thing about bringing it as an ordinance, it had to go through a process, and it has gone through that process. And, you know, so it's had the public debate. By having rule of law, people have been telling us law and order, law and order. Well, this is the rule of law. This is making a law that this community believes in. Now, another thing I would like to address, it is certainly within debate, if Councilmember Feinberg or others want to point out that there are other jurisdictions that either have opposite laws or have not passed the law, that's fine. But one of the questions I've been frequently asked over the years, why do we even have a city of Rockville? Why don't we just be part of Montgomery County like Silver Spring, Bethesda, and other named places, but that are not really municipalities? Well, there are reasons we have a city. We can do planning on our own, we can do budgeting on our own, we can do policing on our own, we can do a lot of things on our own, and it gives us a degree of independence and a way of saying these are our values as a city. It doesn't mean that we don't follow federal, state, and county law. We do, and we do a lot of cooperations with all these jurisdictions. But when it comes to this jurisdiction, I think it is time for the city of Rockville to take a stand on these. So I would like to vote on this proposal by Councilmember Feinberg and see where it goes, and then we'll know what to do the next step.
I just want to weigh in and say a couple things. One is thank you, Councilmember, for bringing that forward. We have not, as a body, had a conversation about this. This was introduced as an ordinance, which once it's introduced as an ordinance, pretty much precluded us, the five of us, working together in a public forum to talk about it. We have listened to hours and hours and hours of testimony. We have read thousands of pages of emails and letters that people from around the world have sent in. Some very thoughtful, well-spoken, reasoned, others horrific. The venom has been spread on both sides of the issue. No side gets a pass on this. I will say that it is very disappointing to me that in the city of Rockville, where thanks to former Chief of Police Terry Treshik, we have had community policing in the city for 27 years, our officers are well schooled in their position as public safety leaders in our community. We do not have an issue in our community with immigrants, people of color feeling threatened. I met with our police officers. I listened for over an hour. I asked them questions. They asked me questions. We had a nice dialogue about what this proposed ordinance would mean for them. And I think that actually what you're suggesting is the way it should be. This should be written by our chief of police and our police officers and our city manager. It shouldn't be written by those of us who, for some, have political motivations on this. We do not have a problem in the city, and this is a solution looking for a problem. And I'm very disappointed. I mentioned to you all earlier that I was at the vestiture of Chief Judge, just totally went out of my head. Thank you, Patrick Woodward, last week. And it was a very interesting process where 3 individuals were asked by the judge to speak. And one of them was Larry Gibson. He's a professor of law at Maryland School of Law in Baltimore. He's also the author of Young Thurgood, The Making of a Supreme Court Justice. And he was eloquent in his discussion of the rule of law and what this county, this city, and this state, country were founded on. And many of you mentioned the rule of law today, but in a different context. The rule of law speaks to what our police officers are tasked with doing. They're not tasked with enforcing federal immigration laws. We're not asking them to enforce federal immigration laws, but to put them in a position where we are now creating a law that says that they can't work with other jurisdictions, should that ever be necessary, really puts them in a quandary. One of the articles in this is G, and it says mayor and council approval required for certain agreements. Well, guess what? The mayor and council take a break in August. We go on recess. We are required by statute to have 1 meeting a month. And this year, that meeting will be on August 3rd. After that, we are on recess until September 11th. Now, what if this was enacted and our police officers needed us to make a decision on something? The 5 of us don't have a scheduled meeting. Now, we can call an emergency meeting, you're right, but this puts an undue burden on the process of our public safety officers doing the job that they've been hired to do. The other comment I want to make is, today, once again, I had the privilege of giving the oath of office to one of our new Rockville police officers. The oath was read to you today, but it's very interesting because when I read that oath to that officer and they raise their right hand and swear, I get chills every single time. Today was actually the first time that my voice didn't crack doing it. And there's a personal reason for that, which doesn't need to be stated. But these men and women take an oath to protect this city, to protect our citizens. They don't care whether we live here, whether we are legal, or we're not using that word, whether we are documented or not documented. They take an oath of office to protect this city. And it says, without partiality or prejudice, to the best of my ability. And we are so fortunate that we have people willing to do that. It takes a lot of courage, people, to stand up there and do that, especially with the uncertainties of the world of today. I make no bones about what's going on at the federal level. I don't support it and I don't like it. But that doesn't mean that we in the city of Rockville have to take on the mantle of the federal government. We are elected to represent the people of the city of Rockville. We have so many things that we could be doing together, the 5 of us. And we didn't even talk about this. We need to be talking about the big things that make everybody feel welcome in our city, that make everybody prosper in our city, that make it a success for every single person. That includes everyone. So I'm just really disappointed that some are allowed to bring forth an ordinance at the last minute and put it in front of us, and yet there's a closed mind to considering someone else's idea. I think that's very unfortunate. And it speaks, I guess, unfortunately, it speaks to the level of discourse that we as a country have. We are rigid in our views. We are not willing to listen to hear. We are not willing to collaborate and cooperate. And that makes me very sad. So I would support your amendment, I think, or your motion. I think it would be a good one. And I'm sorry to hear that there isn't support for it. Councilmember Pershela.
Madam Mayor, that was just a staggering speech,
Thank you.
and not in a good sense.
Speaks to my point.
The ordinance was brought forth as an ordinance, which meant that it would go through a process. And it's been a long process. We've had a long hearing, a long community forum. We've had hundreds of emails, but it's gone through the process. There's nothing in our procedures, mayor and council, where we could not have had, for example, a work session on this topic, as long as it's public. We could have done that. Any one of us could have asked for that. Nobody did. When I did email to both Mayor Newton and Councilman Plackfitch-Carr in separate emails some revisions I would like to have in the ordinance as you've seen it in today's packet. I emailed that on May 22nd. It's June 19th. It's 4 weeks ago. People had a chance to consider some revisions I would like to see in this ordinance, 3 whereas clauses. I've tried my best to let people know what I've been up to. So I emailed these proposed changes. I never heard back from the mayor on it. I did hear back from Councilmember Plackfitch-Carr. They then went to legal, so they made them read the way they should read in an ordinance. And that was then forwarded to mayor and council about a week ago. So all of my colleagues have had a chance to review for a week the 3 proposed changes that I have suggested. Whereas tonight we have a suggestion and a motion from Councilmember Feinberg that we do something and we're going to vote on it today. No process, no discussion. That could have been had a long time ago. Secondly, again, the rule of law has been brought forward, and that we are a nation of laws, and I will again remind everybody, laws are made by elected bodies, period. Policies are not laws. We need policies. We have a lot of policies in the state, in the city, but they're not laws. And so the way that both Councilmember Feinberg and Mayor Newton have alluded or claimed that this is for political motivation, I find that distasteful. I think we should be judging the proposed ordinance and also Councilmember Feinberg's suggestion on its merits and vote on them. There are differences of opinion. Nobody's going to be happy. You can't satisfy everybody on this one. So anyway, I just soon go ahead and vote on Councilmember Feinberg's motion and see where that ends up, and then we'll know where to go from there.
Councilmember Feinberg.
Oh, thank you. I just want to add to the existing ordinance as proposed, it's unenforceable. For example, and I'm citing right from it, city manager duties. The city manager must take reasonable measures to ensure that all city departments, officials, officers, employees, and agents are aware of the provisions of this ordinance. There's no way to put on the city manager what is a reasonable measure. It's not defined anywhere in here. There is nothing in here about the enforcement of this ordinance. So it's an ordinance without any teeth. And that's why, in my view, if you have a policy, you can be much more specific and directive in your policy, and you can define things. Let our officers and let our city manager, these are our professionals, let them craft something together and bring it to this body for discussion and mayor and council approval. But to say that we had the opportunity to discuss more than the ordinance is disingenuous. From day one, it was only the ordinance thrust upon us. We had the discussion in the green sheets clearly of what the difference is between an ordinance, a resolution, and a policy. That's absolutely correct. It was in the first set of green sheets, and it's in this one additionally. But we have never been able to have the discussion. It was always focused on the ordinance, the ordinance, the ordinance. Never went beyond that. Have we ever asked our police officers to come and tell us what do they think about this ordinance? How are they going to deal with it? That too has never occurred, and yet we're asked just to blithely pass this ordinance.
Councilmember Priscilla.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Feinberg's talking about an ordinance that has been proposed a long time ago, but we're now focused on her motion, which is to direct the city manager and the police to make a policy, and I think we should vote on that. Then we can talk about the ordinance. But Councilmember Feinberg, we could have talked about this at any point in time at your suggestion, and we could have included anything you wanted to discuss, whether it should be a policy or a resolution or an ordinance. We could have done that. You could have requested it. You've had a long, long time to make that request, and you haven't made it. And now you're bringing something at the last moment.
Councilmember Feinberg.
No, please, no, go ahead, I'm positive.
Thank you. I wanted to give you the opportunity. Fortunately, that's reflective how this body has been functioning. If we're really going to be truthful up here, this is how this body has been functioning for over more than a year. It has been one time after another. There have been things thrust in front of us, boards and commission reports without us meeting all together, even though it was a joint priority, or LGBT items that we all had priorities and announced that we wanted to participate in. Things would be just shoved in front of us, and it hasn't been a body up here working with mutual respect and collegiality. So let's be really transparent about it.
Councilmember Onley.
Actually, you took the words out of my mouth. I will not be supporting the motion on the table. If this motion were brought up a few weeks ago, maybe we could have married it with the ordinance that's on the table tonight. But it says a lot about this governing body. It says that, you know, our new city manager, Mr. DeSpirito, has recommended that we have some work sessions, and we're going to have some work sessions, but I think that is so much needed. We are long overdue for work sessions where we work as one body and just get it all out on the table and not have these, you know, surprise attacks or last minute motions, and really talk it through and make sure that we're doing the right thing for the citizens of this city. We represent Rockville, and here we are again at a crossroad. And I am going to support this ordinance. I will not be supporting the motion on the table, but as a governing body, we really need to get going with the work sessions, because we really need to get ourselves together and roll up our sleeves for what we were elected to do.
All right, there's a motion on the table. It's been seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Motion carries 3-2. I'm so sorry. That's what I meant. I'm so sorry. The motion fails. 2-3. Councilmember Plakovich-Carr.
So I had a statement that I prepared, and then I wanted to address something that was said earlier. So we've received more input on this subject than any other issue before the mayor and council during my 2 years on this body. More than 1,000 Rockville residents have weighed in when you factor all the emails, people have come and spoken in person, and the two dueling petitions in favor and in opposition to the ordinance. And Rockville residents have made their voices loud and clear. They overwhelmingly support this ordinance by a margin of more than 2-1. Here are just a few of the comments that we received from Rockville residents in support. Quote, "Immigrants and inclusiveness make us stronger. We must continue to be a welcoming community." From Joyce. Carol said, "I live in a very ethnically diverse neighborhood and feel richer for it." Sebastian said, quote, "The truth is, none of us would pick up the phone to call 911 in our moment of greatest need or come forward as witnesses to a crime if we thought that those actions might result in the deportation of somebody that we love," end quote. Quote, "We cannot be free as long as we treat others as if they don't deserve freedom," said Jackie. We also heard from the pastor of a church in Twin Brook, whose parishioners are afraid that law enforcement will wait outside for them, as they did at a church in Alexandria. We heard from residents who warned that this issue was not just about undocumented immigrants, that anyone of foreign descent who speaks with an accent may hesitate to call the police. But the public debate has been far from pretty. Threats have been made against members of this body. Nativist extremists have sent nasty emails conveying despicable sentiments about immigrants. We've also heard some misinformation propagated, so I wanted to set the record straight on 3 issues. First, the draft ordinance keeps Rockville police focused on fighting crime rather than doing the job of the federal government. Suspected criminals, regardless of immigration or citizenship status, will be arrested and prosecuted. Second, there is no federal requirement for local law enforcement to enforce immigration laws. The draft ordinance adheres to federal, state, and county law. Consequently, the city is not at risk of losing any federal funding, especially since the Justice Department recently narrowed its definition of a sanctuary city. Third, this ordinance will make us all safer. Research shows that local jurisdictions that do not enforce federal immigration laws have lower crime rates. That's why the police chiefs of major U.S. cities support such initiatives, and that's why Montgomery County already has a similar policy. Immigrants are an integral part of our community. 1 in 3 Rockville residents were born outside of the U.S. Immigrants are our neighbors, our coworkers, and our children's classmates. Regardless of their immigration status, they pay taxes and contribute to our economy. We need to send a clear message to the city of Rockville. We need to send a clear message that the city of Rockville and our police will continue to serve everyone. In closing, I want to share just one more thought from a Rockville resident, John. Quote, "We get to choose what kind of community we want to be. One where our people live in fear, or one where our neighbors and friends know that they are welcomed and accepted," end quote. I choose the latter. And I also just wanted to briefly correct something that was said earlier about Section G of the ordinance in regards to agreements between the city and the federal government. So those agreements actually are not things that are taken in lightly. They have to actually do with long-standing, multi-year memorandums of understanding between a local jurisdiction and ICE. So it wouldn't be the type of thing that would need to be done on a, hasty basis. I mean, I certainly would hope that the city would never enter into such an MOU, but I do think it's appropriate that the mayor and council makes that decision, that shouldn't be up to a city employee to make that call ultimately. But that certainly would not apply for if there was a suspected criminal who happened to be undocumented and it was appropriate to get the federal authorities involved in a particular case. It would not hinder our police department's ability to respond to certain situations like that.
Councilmember Priscilla.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't have any prepared statements tonight, but I do want to also speak about item G, mayor and council approval required for certain agreements. I agree with Councilmember Plakovich-Carr that these would be agreements that would be negotiated over a period of time based on models from other communities and models from ICE itself or other federal agencies. So the claim that we would need to enter into one of these agreements on an emergency basis is not true. However, I personally hold out the possibility that this mayor and council might choose, under certain well-defined circumstances, choose to do just that. But it brings that into the purview of the mayor and councils explicitly, and that's where it belongs as the elected body of this city. I do have 3 insertions that I would like to propose. I think we can vote on these one at a time. And these 3 insertions are I'm asking to put these in here precisely to address some of the miscommunication and misunderstanding, and also to address the concern about why we're doing it in the first place. So I would like to propose a whereas clause as follows. Whereas current federal immigration law does not require local governments to enforce civil immigration laws.
Federal civil immigration laws.
Okay, let me read that again. Whereas current federal immigration law does not require local governments to enforce federal civil immigration laws.
Councilmember Plakovich-Carr.
I'm not sure if that was a formal motion, but I'll just say in general, I think all 3 amendments that were offered to the draft ordinance are good ones, and I'd support including all of them.
Why don't you go ahead and read the other 2, Councilmember?
Okay, all right, sir. Second one, whereas the city of Rockville follows all federal laws applicable to the city of Rockville. And then third one, whereas by codifying the city of Rockville's informal policy, Rockville residents will be ensured that the City of Rockville employees and law enforcement officers will follow certain procedures when interacting with and providing services to the public.
Is that in the form of a motion?
I move all three whereas clauses.
Is there a second? Councilmember Onley.
I'll second that.
Further discussion? All right, let's move it to a vote. There's been a motion to amend the ordinance. It's been seconded. All those in favor of amending the ordinance, please raise your hand. Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries 3-1 to 1. Is there a motion to approve the ordinance as amended?
Actually, I just want to
Councilmember
make one more statement, and I had said this earlier, and I'm saying it again. We are not trying to make Rockville a sanctuary city. And anyone who heard on the radio, who read it somewhere, I really want to see your documentation. Because if it's out there, then we need to correct it. And this is about fostering community trust. It's about safety, and it's about making all of our residents feel comfortable in this city. And if there's another word or rumor, and it's really disturbing at times, because we have become a society when somebody says, oh, well, she's got green hair, and somebody else says, did you know she has green hair? Oh yeah, she's got green hair. And we just seem to grab on, and I'm using that as a ridiculous example, but we have become a society that when people say something, we just run with it. And we can't do that. We have to make sure we have the facts to back it up. And that is so important, and I'm urging anyone who sees anything, and I'm also urging people to read this ordinance. And I'm urging anyone who has any information that says that we are making Rockville a sanctuary city to please bring it forward. And I'll be honest with you, when people say something and they don't have the documentation to back it up, where I come from, we call that a lie. So I really want to see what's out there. Thank you.
Councilmember Feinberg.
Thank you, Councilmember Onley. I don't know who was saying this is a sanctuary city. You may have seen it, but I think part of the issue is in the dialogue that there's no definition of what a sanctuary city is. So whether it's in this ordinance by any word or not, it's what others may deem this as a sanctuary city ordinance. Despite the fact that it never uses the word, I clearly agree with you, it is never mentioned in here. It's what other jurisdictions and others, because unfortunately, I would agree with you, we are so polarized in this country right now, others may deem this. So I'm not sure it's a matter of documentation. I agree with you, this does not say sanctuary city, but that won't stop other entities from saying it's a sanctuary city ordinance.
Okay, I'll buy that. But then that means that the people who are using that word are not familiar with what that word actually is and what it means, and the trouble that it causes, and people really need to do their research. I'll agree with you, okay? What you said makes sense. But it still goes back to grabbing something and running with it and not having the documentation, or not understanding and not coming to someone to get some understanding. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard a term. I've asked members of this body, I've asked staff, I've asked the city attorney, what does that mean? I would no more come up with a definition myself than I would think of getting on a ship and going to the moon. If you don't understand, please ask, and please let's keep the conversation going, because that's one of the problems as well, that we don't communicate enough with one another. Thank you.
Well, I certainly agree with your last comment. We don't. I'd like to add a comment, and perhaps, depending on what you all think, because it is at the last minute, a K to the ordinance. In the event any provision of this ordinance shall be invalid, illegal, unenforceable, or in conflict with 8 U.S.C. 1373, which is referenced in the ordinance, then such provision shall be eliminated from the ordinance, and the validity, legality, and enforceability of the remaining provisions shall continue unimpaired thereby. This is because there have been some insertions put in here which, if they are not enforceable, then it could nullify the entire ordinance. So I would add that clause to make sure that there's a separation, and that the clause that is found to be illegal, unenforceable, or in conflict is taken out, but it doesn't destroy the whole ordinance. Councilmember Pershalo.
Madam Mayor, the insertions that were suggested tonight were whereas insertions.
Right.
And the whereas clauses, there are several, are there to clarify the purpose, and they are there to, basically explain why it's being done, but they're not the actual enforceable part, which is section 11-3, fostering community trust, where we have A through through J at the moment.
Are you suggesting that mine should be a whereas?
No, I'm just clarifying that I added whereases, and I didn't suggest any amendments to the already proposed enforceable part of this.
I agree with that. I'm just wondering, should my suggestion be in the whereases as opposed to under the provisions?
I don't see how it would work as a whereas, because it's actually saying what to do if some of these, if one of the enforceable I through J is found not to be, according to a particular law.
Ms. Daniel?
Madam Mayor, council members, that severability language is usually found in contracts, not in ordinances. In ordinances, statutory construction is governed by common law, and so if, whatever the common law says as far as interpretation of the provisions in the code would govern, not the severability clause. Those are usually found in contracts.
Okay. Councilmember Plakovich-Carr.
So to ask our city attorney a follow-up question then, so in other words, you're saying that any statute, if any part of it is found to be invalid by a court, the rest of it still would stand, because that's how our legal system works.
Certainly, unless, again, it depends on which portion it is, because under statutory construction, which is governed by common law, there's already laws in place that govern how, if something's found to be unconstitutional or unenforceable, how we would move forward then under the statute. But it would not automatically invalidate the entire statute.
All right. Anything else? Councilmember Pershalo.
I did want to address the sanctuary city phrase. And when this first came up, we heard a lot about sanctuary city. And I strongly discouraged the use of that term, because I don't believe there's such thing as a sanctuary city. We have no power to stop federal agencies from coming into the city and enforcing the law. And I thought that whomever was claiming this was a sanctuary city law were misleading, and were misleading as to the intent, but also it just became such a magnet for a whole lot of stuff. I even went so far to visit our Human Rights Commission on this issue, and discourage them from using the term sanctuary city for the same reason, that it's just not, there's no such thing in the United States. Sanctuary has traditionally been like a church or something, where if the criminal manages to make it inside the church doors, nobody would follow the guy in. And that's what a sanctuary is, and we're just not that. But we can do what Rockville can do, and we can govern what our interactions are under certain circumstances. That's what this does. And it clarifies that it's out there if it passes. And if somebody wants to come later and amend this or change it or take it down, they can. But I think we should go ahead and vote for it as is with 3 amendments and see where we go.
Councilmember Plakovich-Carr.
I think that's my cue to make a motion. I moved that we adopt the amended ordinance to add a new section 11-3 entitled Fostering Community Trust.
I'll second it.
All those in favor of the amended ordinance, please raise your hand. Opposed? Motion carries 3-2.